Welcome to TaNaCh Talk. I'm your host, William Hall, broadcasting live from Kingsland, Texas, USA, with another episode of Controversial Issues with that most controversial rabbi on the internet, Rabbi Chaim Checkmate. Welcome back, Coffman. How are you this fun day? We have to keep it interesting every time now. Yep,
Doing great as always. Always a pleasure to be here.
Pleasure to have you. Welcome. I see Paul Bro just joined us. We got started a little bit late, 5 minutes late on my end. Still working out some kinks and the whole new setup and everything. So glad we're back in the studio together for sure. We've got a lot to go over. A lot of busy stuff happening with our shows. A lot of people commenting, good stuff, questionable things, things that people are just curious about. So moving forward with this whole concept, last week we did problems that with JC factor being the Messianic line based on the bloodline and things like that. And so this week we're just going to kind of continue on just more New Testament problems why the New Testament doesn't work. So it's not just going to be the bloodline. If you guys have any comments or questions that you would like to add into this, I'll be watching chat, so feel free to put your comments or questions in here, and I'll try to feed those into him if I find that there's a break in his lectures that he's doing today.
That'll never happen.
That never happened.
Scream.
Yeah. So this
Start
is
beeping right now.
This is the guy you literally have to throw a wrench into the machine to get it to stop. So that's all right.
The way it works. What are you gonna do?
That's why you get paid the big bucks. Yeah, zero.
That's why we listen to the music over here. Come on.
There you go. Very good. I'm going to turn you up a little bit more just to get us a little spike there. Okay, good deal. All right, so I'm going to pass this over to you, Rabbi. Again, thank you for being here with us, and I will look forward to what you got to say. And hello, everybody. Real quickly, big shout out to Shalom, Big J, Chad Corliss, Andrea, a long-time YouTube moderator, the Queen Bee out there. Of Revelation 11:05, I see you join us there. Zero Lord of the In-Between. I love some of these YouTube handles. They're pretty cool. Very creative. All right. Okay, so we will let you go. Take it away, Rabbi, and I'll be listening.
Okay. Always a pleasure to be here. I just got a boring name. Just call me Rabbi Coffman. That's just, I don't know, Warlord, Zoolord. I don't know. There are a lot of different things people could say. I guess we'll start, I think, with the most obvious. I mean, there are a lot of contradictions. I think the most obvious, and we'll see where this goes, because it's really a much bigger topic, and that is dealing with Mr. S, what we're going to call Satan. Right, we know that Satan, as according to us, is the evil inclination, the angel, of death. But there's a major misunderstanding, right? And that is that we don't consider Satan a fallen angel, right? We did a whole show on fallen angels, and basically according to Kabbalah, angels, spiritual forces do not have free will. Right? Nothing in the universe, right? We're talking about inanimate things, i.e., the stars, the moon, the planets, wind, fire, like these things do not have free will. They can't do whatever they want, right? Certainly according to our sources, they are programmed. So therefore, if God wants to create a big wind and make, fire and hurricane and other things, so that'll happen because God wills it. Right? There's no such thing as, these forces having their own power. So one major idea, and we're just going to flush this out a little bit, is where does all evil come from? Right? According to the Christians. So all evil comes from him. Well, it's very convenient. Very convenient that, according to them, as someone here wants to claim they have jurisdiction. What do they have jurisdiction on? What in the world do they have jurisdiction on? They don't have jurisdiction on anything, right? There's a heavenly court, just like there is a court, right, in this world. God brings heavenly court together, right? They bring up all the evidence. Now, does God need a heavenly court? No. Torah doesn't need a heavenly court. Why does he have a heavenly court? So it shows, right? It shows God's humility. He doesn't need them to judge. He can judge himself. right? God is going to bring up all the angels that we create when we do good things, when we do bad things. And then God's going to judge it, right? Does he need the angels to watch whatever we do and record? Just like we're recording, hopefully I don't blow up your system, right? So if that's the case, if that's the case, then God doesn't need the angels either. He doesn't need spiritual forces. He allows them to exist for whatever reason, right? These angels will give testimony. God's going to call them in. They'll give testimony. God's going to look at it and he'll judge it. However he judges it. But there's a major misconception, right? So we'll read Isaiah chapter 45, verse 7. Isaiah 45, verse 7, famous verse says, I am the one who forms light, creates darkness, makes peace, creates evil. I am Hashem, maker of all these. Isaiah 45, 7. Now, this is a major problem for Christians, right? Major mistranslation, for them also. Why? Because the Torah here says, and the prophet says, Isaiah over here says, and everyone agrees Isaiah is a prophet, nobody disagrees. God created light, darkness, made peace, and created evil. Now, if God created evil, Now, does that mean God's evil? No. So why did God create evil? What's the purpose of evil? So the Ramchal, Rabbi Chaim Coffman, blessed memory, lived in the 1400s, known as the Ramchal, wrote in Derech Hashem, in the way of God, right? A book all steeped in Kabbalah, all about why God created the world, purpose of man, the evil inclination, how the evil inclination works, reincarnation, actually a Jewish concept, the purpose of the nations, etc. So he says over there, you have these spiritual forces. Very good. So you have these spiritual forces, and God uses them like messengers. He uses them like messengers. So here, so he says, why did God create evil? Right? God created evil to test man, to test us, to see if we're going to tap into the dark side, to the wrong side, or not. So doesn't mean God's evil, right? But any Christian Bible, any translation is not going to translate that God created evil. Because if God created evil, they have a major issue. Major issue. So again, we don't believe in fallen angels. That's a problem. Because according to them, Mr. S, Satan, is a fallen angel. Angels don't have free will. They are messengers. Right? They are absolute messengers. And a messenger, when God sends them, they can't do what they want. We're going to see. Right? When does Satan appear? When does he appear? Right? When does he appear? He appears by an angel sent by God to prevent Bilam, the non-Jewish prophet. Why does God send this angel? To prevent him from cursing the Jewish people. Now, what happens in the end? Bilam ends up blessing them. Now, if he's really a fallen angel, and he's got a lot of power, how do he mess this up? Right? Definitely not a mission for someone who's evil, or someone who represents evil. Right? Because if he can do what he wants, he doesn't fail. He's an angel. He can convince people to do things, etc. How does he fail over here? So the Torah says, Numbers chapter 22, verse 22. People will be happy I'm actually quoting verses here. Right? It says, God was very angry when Bilam went and the Malach, the angel of the Lord, stood in the road to oppose him. Now the word to oppose him, the word lisatan, the word to oppose, has the Hebrew word satan in it. So now it says lisatan, to oppose. So here, the word for oppose is clearly not referring to an angel rebelling against God's will. That's not what's going on. Right? This angel is doing what God wants. It's a messenger designated to carry out God's will. So when the Torah talks about a malach, right? Yaakov sends a malach, sends malachim in the plural to visit Esav. Right? Now many say, who are these malachim? They were real malachim. Right? But really, what's the word malach mean, according to the Torah? Right? Biblical Hebrew, a malach means a messenger. That's what it means. Even though people translate it as angel. Now, sometimes maybe, in this case, Yaakov sent these messengers, they were angels. right? They were actually angels, different reasons, why he sent them, right? That's not really the point, but the idea is he sent them, right? He sent them to Esav. But a Malach in general is a messenger. Now, if this angel is doing God's will, right? It cannot be. Doesn't make sense according to the text, and we're very strict here looking at the text and not turning the text into a pretzel. This cannot be referring to angels rebelling against God. If that's his job, to go against God here, there, everywhere, why in the world is he going to do God's will? Right? That's one thing. Second thing is, where do we see Mr. S to Satan himself? Where do we see him in another place? What's the obvious place? Book of Job. Right? Beginning of the book of Job. Now, at the beginning of the book of Job, what does God say? It says, look at my servant Job over here, and he pipes up and he says, hey, he's only your servant because he does whatever he wants. If I make his life difficult, he says, if I make his life difficult, he's going to blaspheme against you. God says, no, he's not. It says, good, let me test him. So what does it say over there? Right? It says that Satan has no free will. He's given permission to torment torment Job in order to test his loyalty. But what does it say over there? It says he can't kill him. He's not allowed to kill him. So that means he can set him up to test him and do all that, but he's limited. He's limited what he can do. He's given permission. And if God didn't give him permission, God says, okay, you're allowed to do it. And if God said no, what's he going to do? Is he going to go against him? Can't. He's only allowed to do it because God said. So we see Satan's a force, right? He's a force over here, used by God for what purpose? For what purpose? To test mankind. So we can understand the purpose of evil, as we mentioned before, right? Is exactly that, is to test us, and that's the verse we brought, right? Isaiah chapter 45, verse 7. Now, let's do the flip side, right? Against what the Christians say, which is similar. We're just going to throw this out there, right? It's similar to somebody, let's say in Greek mythology. You got all these gods fighting with each other, doing all kinds of things, doing what they want, seemingly. So Judaism does not regard, the Satan as a separate force that exists to oppose God. That's not what he's doing. God created evil for that. Evil can run rampant if a person wants to tap into it. Right? But the whole purpose of it is to test us. The whole purpose of the Satan is to test us. He's the evil inclination. That's what he does. He's good at his job. Doesn't need me to agree, right? He does a very good job trying to trap us, trying to get us to do things we shouldn't do. Very good, right? But at the same time, he's not a separate force, right? Because we have to understand, we mentioned, I don't know if we mentioned or not, I think we did, right? But one of the main tenets in Judaism is that God is absolute. God doesn't change. God is not fickle. There's nothing that exists outside of him, right? God says, I'm God, took you out of Egypt. He intervenes in history, right? But God is not like any other being in the world. Before Genesis chapter 1, verse 1, that says God created the heaven and the earth. What was God doing before that? Doesn't say. So we know, the Midrash says, busy building, creating, destroying worlds. Right? So he's busy doing that. That's before the world. Right? It's before the world existed. So there's nothing else existed outside of him. Because if we say there are other things outside of him, that means he's not unique. That means he's not absolute. Now, many make the mistake, and they're going to say, God's so powerful, and he's got so many things to do. He's got to keep all the, planets in line. He's got to keep the earth a little bit, exactly where it is, not too close to the sun, not too far from the sun, right? Otherwise, we wouldn't exist. Probably a good thing, so you wouldn't have to listen to me, right? But at the end of the day, God's too lofty. He's too lofty for us. So why would he need man? But don't we believe God knows the thoughts of man? God wants to have a connection to man, right? Very true. So if that's true, why would he create other things and then disappear? And then say, wow, he's so lofty, he's going to get power to the wind. And he's going to get power to fire. And he's going to get power to the water. He's going to get power, to other things. Whatever it is, and he's going to disappear. If someone created a building, person who created the building, what do you think? He's going to disappear? He's not going to have a say in, this, that, and the other thing? What, all the more so. Why would someone, why would some being, let's say, create the world, put everything in motion and nature and this and that, and say, well, I'm too busy, I'm done. I'm going to let the world go to, wherever it's going to go. So anything that we say, what's the problem with all this? The problem is anything you say that's outside of God, that has independent power. So what do we call that in the vernacular? Idolatry. Now, idolatry means, it means something very specific. You're going to bow down to something, you're going to serve it, you're going to sacrifice to it, other things. But idolatry essentially is giving something a force that it doesn't have. That's what idolatry is. Now, in today's generation, idolatry could be food. Idolatry could be money, power, fame, right? Idolatry could be sports, entertainment, right? But here, if you want to speak about we're talking about worshiping something, right? So you want to talk about something specific, giving it a power that it doesn't have. That's idolatry, right? That essentially is idolatry. So here you're saying, or people may say, well, these other forces can do what they want. Physical forces, i.e. the wind, water, whatever, and spiritual forces. Angels are spiritual forces. Anything that is a physical or spiritual force that a person would say has independent power, so we consider that heresy, 100%. That's heresy, because that's saying God is not absolute. Right? How do we know God is absolute? Because the Torah says, Shema Yisrael, Hashem Elokeinu, Hashem Echad. God is one. What does it mean he's one? First of all, there are no other gods but him. That the Torah states clear many times. Right? So if you put something else, in power, so, you can have more than one God, polytheism, etc., that goes against what the Torah says. And this whole thing of Shituf, believing in, Christianity, whether it's part of it, it's not part of it, giving some other aspect of God, etc. The whole question of non-Jews are liable for that, non-liable for that. For Jews, for sure, it's a problem. We hold that it's idolatry in either case, right? But you're giving something a power, that doesn't have. So by doing so, we're not saying, if you say that God is one, and that means God is unique, and there's nothing more unique in the world, than God himself, because you can only say what he's not. So if you're giving something a power outside of him, then he's not unique. Then he's not absolute. And if God is not absolute, then who's going to serve him? Right? Aristotle had a mechanical God, that he could do certain things, but basically he's controlled. So if he's controlled, he has no power. If he has no power, then who's going to serve him? Right? One of the 13 principles of faith, right, according to the Rambam, right, Maimonides, is that God has the ability to reward and punish. And we see from the Torah very clear, second paragraph of the Shema, you do what you're supposed to do, plenty of rain, plenty of food, everything's good. You don't do what you're supposed to do, just the opposite, right? You're going to get punished. The Torah makes clear, things are permissible, things are not, and there will be punishment. Now, if there's a God that's not unique, it's not absolute, why would you serve him? If he's man-made, like the conservative movement would say, like the reform movement would say, the Torah is man-made. There was, 4 authors and a redactor. And the Jews, I don't know, they ate all the same hallucinogenic mushroom in the desert. That's where we get all the stories. That's how the Jews came out of Egypt and all that, right? But if God is not all powerful and things are relative, then things change. If things change, then there's no consistency. Then there's no base for morality. Morality changes. Famous parable by the Dubna Maggid. Dubna Maggid tells a story of king walking in the forest, and the king sees arrows shot in trees with bullseyes. So this king says, I got to find, this sharpshooter to teach my men how to shoot. So what does he do? He finally finds this guy. He says, he's such a sharpshooter. Can you teach my men how to shoot? So he said, sure. I shoot my bow and arrow. When it hits a tree, I draw a bullseye around it. Right? That bullseye is called morality. Morality changes. Right? Something that was forbidden, let's say in the time, my parents and my grandparents, time more 80, 90, 100 years ago. Today, come on, that's so archaic. That's so behind the times. We're so up to date, with, transgender and this and that. We're so much more open-minded. It's unbelievable, right? I don't want to digress here. The point is that if God is unique in the world, and you say that he's not, and you say that there are other forces that have independent power, then that means that God is not God. That, these other things take force. Now, the Ramchal brings down, just throw this out there, there's a heavenly court just like there's a court in this world. So you're going to say, well, we create positive angels, negative angels by what we do. Good things we do, bad things we do. So, before God's going to judge after 120 years, person dies, we're going to get judged, as we said, just like we're recording. All these angels are now going to testify. So there's an obvious question. If God is absolute, God is infinite, God knows everything, and he knows the thoughts of man, etc., why in the world are we going to do this? Right? Why does he need it? He doesn't need it. He can do what he wants. But why does he do it? He shows humility. He shows humility over here by saying that I'm going to judge it by what went on in this world. And I got my angels to do it. I got my messengers to do it. Just like so the Ramchal says there, just like there's a heavenly court here in this world. Sorry, there's a court in this world. There's a court, in the next world. There's a heavenly court. And the heavenly court judges however it judges. But he points out, he says, I'm not going into any detail here, but he's pointing out there's such a concept. And there's such a concept of angels. And there are different types of angels. Some are on a higher level, some are on a lower level. But bottom line, they're messengers. God sends them out to do whatever they need to do. Right? So over here, same thing. He's a force. He's an angel, the Satan. But the major difference is they got a problem with Isaiah 45:7. So what are they going to do? They're going to mistranslate it. Because they can't say God created evil. If they say God created evil, what do you do with Mr. S? What do you do with the Satan? He is evil. He is the one causing all these problems. Right? All the terrible things we see in the world. God, is kicking back. He's sipping pina coladas. He's on the beach. He's having a great time. He's got the Satan to do all this. Right? But you got a problem over here. Because God created evil. Now again, doesn't say he is evil. But what's the point? The point is for us to be tested. Some people are tested more. Some people are tested less. We go through all kinds of things. I went to we call it a Shiva house. I went to a mourner's house yesterday when I was up north. Actually, someone came regularly to my classes up there. And the person, tragically, he passed away. And basically had brain cancer, suffered I found out, 17 years. Been suffering for 17 years. So you look at something like that, and he left, 5 kids, 6 kids, oldest is 16. Right? I think he passed away at the age of 51. I think it was 51. Right? It's hard to fathom. It's hard to fathom why this happened, the toll on the family, day in and day out, and people, different shifts, people coming to take care of it, whatever. It was very hard, especially going through all the things they had to go through. chemotherapy and, different things. And, a lot of time he wasn't there. I mean, you have a number of surgeries on your brain, it's kind of hard, like, where a person's holding in the world. So, things happen. We don't understand why, right? 100% we don't understand why, but we have tests. We have tests in health. We have tests in family. We have tests in livelihood. Some people have it more, some people have it less, some people have all of them together, right? So you say, why does all this happen? We don't know, right? It has to do with, could be some things we caused ourselves, has to do with reincarnation. Our soul has to come back in order to be fixed up, right? For things that it did wrong, right? That's why we say a child is born sick, child born with leukemia, mentally challenged, this and that. Is the child punished for that? No, child can't be punished. Why not? Simple logic. When does a person get punished according to the Torah? When they're an adult. When are they considered an adult? Either for a girl at the age of 12 in a day, or for a boy at the age of 13 in a day. So if this person is born mentally challenged, can't be their fault, right? Can't be the parents' fault either. They're the ones to bring the child into the world. But if we believe in the soul, and that there's reward and punishment, it could be. The soul has an opportunity to come back in this world to get fixed up for whatever it did wrong. Some people, could come back as a rock. Why? Maybe they bullied people. They did terrible things in their previous life. So they have to be kicked around, not be able to do anything. Kicked around, thrown around. There was a story of someone that, never went to synagogue in his area. So what did he come reincarnated as? Part of the wall of a synagogue. So you got to keep hearing prayers over and over and over in order to get fixed up. We don't know. We have no idea. But if a person's born that way, right? Let's make it easy. A person's born that way. It's not his fault. It's not the fault of the parents, right? It's not his fault. So you're gonna say, whose fault is it? It's the soul, right? It's sort of, I would say, a quarter of a consolation. Why do I say a quarter? Because this person's suffering. The soul is suffering in this body, right? But it's getting fixed up at the same time. It could be for any number of reasons. Could be, 100 reasons, 1,000 different reasons why, that it has to come back. But the point is, that's not punishment. It's not punishment for the person. It's punishment for the soul that has to come back, right? So if that's true, there is reward and punishment. There's no question, right? Part of the process, of atonement, or a part of what hell is about getting fixed up, in that spiritual world, getting our souls purged of all the terrible things we've done, right? Part of it is, what does the person say when they have an out-of-body experience? Everybody says the same thing. They see their life flash before their eyes. They see every last thing that they've done. Now, when you're a pure soul, it's hard to imagine. But when you're a pure soul, that's embarrassing. Imagine things a person's done that you're embarrassed of. Now, you're going to try and explain why your hand was in the cookie jar, why this, but every last thing that you did, right? Just when you thought it was safe to read National Geographic in the bathroom, not that, right? So everything gets looked at. Everything gets scrutinized. All the things we've done, angels going to testify for what we've done. So there's payback. There's going to be payback. But again, a person born that way, it's not their fault. It's what the soul has to go through. So there are a lot of tests. A lot of tests that we have. Some we fail, some we don't fail, some more, some less, right? But that's the point of what evil is. And that's what the Satan does. He's there to trap us. That's what he's allowed to do. Not only that, he's allowed to take life when God says. He's not allowed to take life against God's will. That he can't do. Right? We see that by Job. See that clear as day. God says, fine. You want to make him suffer? You want to test him? Very good. You're not allowed to kill him. He says you're not allowed to kill him. What does that tell me? What does that tell me? Very simple language. That tells me he can't do whatever he wants. If he's a fallen angel, guess what? He can say, okay, God knows this, right? Because he knows the thoughts of everybody and the angels and all that. So God can, he can say, okay, wink, wink. I had my fingers crossed. Ha ha. Right? He's going to say, I'm going to do what I want anyway. Not happening. Not happening. That's a clear proof. That is a clear proof. Can't do whatever he wants. Right? So now we see certainly, a contradiction, seeing what this is, and that Mr. S, the Sultan himself, is a messenger, right? He's a messenger over here. That we definitely see, from that. So, this is a major problem. Major problem, because according to them, all evil comes from him, right? If all evil comes from him, right? So again, we have a major theological problem, right? We have a major theological problem over here, with such a thing. So that's one thing. So let's see there. We'll see another one over here. There's a statement. There's a statement in the New Testament, 2 Timothy chapter 3 verse 16 says all scripture is inspired by God. So therefore, what would I understand? It means the New Testament, Old Testament are the same. They're on equal standing of divine inspiration. Interesting enough, the conservative movement will say, that, even all these great people, they were divinely inspired. Well, there are a lot of crazy people out there that also claim they were inspired or divinely inspired. You got mass murderers that said they had a purpose in what they were doing, right? But what's the difference? Anyone can claim they're divinely inspired and say, oh, God told me to do this, or God told me to do that, and it's like totally off the rails, so to speak. So divine inspiration doesn't mean anything, right? How are you going to prove that? You got no way to prove it. You're going to say, well, yeah, God came to me. Very good. Where? How many people were there? How many people heard it? See, the only thing we know, and the only religion, quote unquote, that makes the claim is that the Jewish religion says that, you look at Exodus chapter 19, chapter 20, talks about 10 commandments. Who was there at the 10 commandments hearing God give the Torah to the Jewish people? Who was there? 600,000 men between the ages of 20 and 60, not including women and children. What does that mean? About 3 million people. 2 to 3 million people. Muslims agree that was the case. The Christians agree that was the case. So they'll say, we're not chosen anymore. This, that, all kinds of things. But they agree. That's what happened. But no other religion makes such a claim in front of so many people. So you can't say, well, that was divinely inspired. How is that divinely inspired? Everyone agrees. 3/4 of the world agree that happened. Now they're saying we're not chosen, we're not this. Okay, but they agree that it happened. But the problem is these two books should never, if that's the case, and you're going to tell me they're in an equal standing of divine inspiration, what would I say? Pure logic. No oral law, no nothing. Pure logic would tell me if they're on the same footing, they don't contradict. There's no contradiction. But if I do have a contradiction, we got to come up with a reason. And if you cannot come up with a reason, then you have a bona fide contradiction. So therefore, the Christians have to acknowledge that only the Old Testament, quote unquote, 5 books of Moses, whatever you want to call it, right? And not the New maintains the status being inspired by God. Why? Why do they have to acknowledge that? Because when did the New Testament come? Later. It was written after the creation of the Old. Right? Not only that, but it uses the Old Testament to prove its validity. Now that's a problem. It's also a major problem. So if they're going to say, and bring contradictions, that the divinely inspired Old Testament base itself upon, then it cannot maintain its own claim being divinely inspired. Cannot do that. Right? In other words, if you're going to say, and we do, that the Old Testament came later, right, and uses the Old Testament to prove its validity, then you can't contradict it. And if you do contradict it, which we're going to see, if you do contradict it, you better well have a good explanation why it's contradicted. Because you can't make up its own claim of being divinely inspired if there are serious mistakes, right? We'll give one example here, right? We'll see how far we go with it. One example. What does the New Testament say? It says in Luke chapter 14, verse 26, anyone comes to me, does not hate his own father and mother and wife and children and brothers and sisters, yes, even his own life, he cannot be my disciple. That's what it says. Luke 14, verse 26. Now, if you take this passage by itself, see, we're going to cherry pick a little bit, just like the Christians do, right? We're going to cherry pick a little bit. If you look at it out of context as an isolated passage, what does it say? What does it tell me? Very simple. It says you have to hate your family. Well, for some people, it might be easy. They may hate their family anyway, right? You want to be a disciple of JC, you got to hate your family, right? But that clearly contradicts what the Torah says. Contradicts what the Old Testament says. You got to honor your parents. That's, by the way, one of the 10 commandments. Look at that. Exodus chapter 20, verse 12. Honor your father and your mother. And love your fellow as yourself. Leviticus chapter 19, verse 1. Can't hate yourself. So, what's going on over here? How in the world can that happen? That you're going to hate your own father, your mother, your wife. Got to hate everybody, be his disciple. Now, what are the Christians going to respond? Of course, they're going to have an answer. They're going to say, come on, can't take that literally. We're going to say it's a metaphor. Can't take that literally. Because they're going to assert we're taking it out of context. Right? And not only that, it's not an accurate translation. Very interesting. What does their argument confirm? That we don't accept passages that serve as value without applying careful examination to the context and translation to obtain a correct understanding. Right? In other words, you can't cherry pick. You can't take it out of context. You got to scrutinize what's going on. So, okay, you got to see. You got to see what the context is. Say, hey, you got to take that out of context. But look what it says. Look what it says over here. So, we'll use another example. Many Christians like to say, Book of Psalms, there's a statement in the Book of Psalms that refers to the crucifixion. Crucifixion of JC. What does it say? Psalms chapter 22, verse 16. For dogs have surrounded me, a band of evildoers has encompassed me. They pierced my hands and feet. Problem with the verse were the words they pierced. Now, every translation, if you look at any Christian translation of the Book of Psalms, that's what it says. Now, this is a huge case of mistranslation. Not only that, totally lack of context, because you have to look at things, what the Bible says, and what TaNaCh says, the writings, the prophets, etc., what they say and why they say it and what's going on. Right? We say this all the time. You cannot take one verse and look at it totally out of context, even though that's what they do. So first of all, here's a major problem in translation. They mistranslate the word ke'ari. They translate it as pierced. Now, the word ke'ari, what does it mean? Like a lion. Ari means a lion. That's what it means. Right? All over the Bible, all over the Talmud, it means a lion. That's what it means. So what does the verse really mean? They encompassed my hands and feet not they were pierced, like a lion. And that's consistent with many other verses. Isaiah chapter 38, verse 13 states, I'm wait for morning like a lion. Ki'ari, same thing, same word. Even so, it breaks all my bones. Now, what's King David talking about? If you look at the context, he's referring to what? To the experiences when pursued by his enemies. Who are the enemies over here? The enemies of King Saul. That's what he's talking about. So early in the book of Psalms, King David uses terminology that is similar to Psalm 22. Right? Psalm chapter 17, verses 8 to 12. Hide me under the shadow of your wings, from the wicked that oppress me, from my deadly enemies who compass me about. They dog our footsteps. They encompass us. They set their eyes to tread us down to the earth. And now the part we want to see, he is like a lion greedy for its prey. Like a lion. Right? So you got Psalm 22, Psalm 17. David compares his enemies to who? The dogs and lions. Same metaphor. Same exact metaphor that surround him and encompass him. And what's the word he uses? Like a lion. Both cases. Both verses say the exact same thing. Ki'ari. Like a lion. So, therefore, what's the natural conclusion? That there's a mistranslation. Total mistranslation in order to have them sell their story. In order to say, hey, well, there's, we know for sure there's crucifixion in the Old Testament. Oh, how do I know? Book of Psalms, chapter 22, verse 16. Got a problem. Problem is, that's not what the verse says. Got a blatant mistranslation. Now, some Christians would say that the original Hebrew, it says like a lion, right? Maybe they'll admit it. Nonetheless, they're going to say, no, not a good translation, right? They're going to say that there's a fabrication over here. What are they going to claim? It's what we call in Hebrew a ta'u sofer. What's a ta'u sofer? A scribal error. It was written down wrong. They just wrote it down wrong. They wrote the wrong word, right? Or they added a few letters or whatever. That's what they're going to claim. There's a mistake. Or they're going to claim, there's also another translation, what we call the Septuagint. They had 70 rabbis. King Ptolemy had 70 rabbis, put them in 70 different places, and told them to translate the Torah, right? That we call the Septuagint. And they're going to claim, that supports their translation, right? That's going to support their translation. But that's also a problem, right? Also a problem. Because, again, the translation, as we mentioned, is King Ptolemy, is the Babylonian Talmud, Megillah 9:8. Anyone who wants to look it up, right? He got 70 rabbis, and he put them in different places. In order to what? In order to translate the Torah. But what did they translate? They translated the 5 books of Moses. That's all they translated. That's what the Gemara says. They only translated the Torah, not TaNaCh. They translated what the Torah says. 5 books of Moses. That's clear. Did not include the prophets in the holy writings. Right? What we call the Nevi'im and the Ksuvim. Right? Prophets in the writings. So, later translations, where they come from? Where these Greek translations come from? Probably, we would assume Hellenized Jews, right? Who were, assimilated. So they could have put their own things in there. But what's the point over here? They're going to claim, what about the Septuagint? We got to prove, we got to prove from there. What's the problem? They didn't translate it. The Septuagint's only on the 5 books. Nobody says, at least as far as I know, nobody makes the claim that the Septuagint went on the writings of the prophets. So if that's the case, and they're going to claim, we got a translation from that, and that it says pierced. Very good. Who wrote it? Where'd it come from? Can't be from the rabbis over there. They didn't translate it. The Talmud brings down different things, how they translate, and they all came to the same translation, right? For all kinds of different things, right? It's pretty unbelievable. I mean, throughout the whole thing. But the whole point is that it was only on the Bible. It was only the 5 books. It was not on anything else. So if they're going to claim, so they're going to make potentially 2 claims. First claim is there's a scribal error. Well, that's very convenient, right? There's going to be a scribal error in both places. Maybe you have a scribal error in more than one place. Could be, right? Usually if there's you're going to say, well, if it mentions the same thing, it's probably an error in both places. Okay, right? That's one claim. But the other claim, is a lot more difficult to hear, right? And that is that they can rely on the Greek translation, right? On the Septuagint. Problem with that is Septuagint was only on the Torah. It was only on the 5 books, so they can't make such a claim, right? So again, people are going to say, you got to look at the context. You got to see, what do we see over here? King David is saying, clear as day, right? We see in other places where he uses the same language, right? But what is he referring to? He's referring to experiences being pursued by his enemies, right? And he uses the exact same language. So it's incredulous, if you want to think about it. Totally incredulous. They're going to say, no, King David meant this. And that, and that we're going to use as our translation to say that even the book of Psalms, it says over there by crucifixion, right? That's a problem because I have to see it in context. And as we always say, when we did this video on fallen angels, right? We brought up a lot of verses, a lot of verses in TaNaCh where 99% of the game of understanding it is looking at the context. And if you don't look at the context and you cherry pick just like they do, by things in the Talmud and other things, right? So you take it totally out of context. But here I have the same exact context. Fear of being pursued by his enemies. Fear. So what did he say? He's like a lion greedy for its prey. Right? So he said over here as well that in Psalms chapter 22 verse 16, they encompass my hands and feet like a lion. That's what's he afraid of. He's being pursued. Same thing, same exact thing. You want to tell me? Well, yeah, it says the same thing. And if you see other places, sure, there are other sources say a similar thing, right? So you're going to see across the board, the interpretation is exactly the same. Then it's going to be very hard to say. I mean, it's going to be impossible. I'm not going to even say very hard. It's going to be impossible to say, guess what? We have a new way of looking at things. That's what the verse means. Very good. Are you going to tell me that's what the verse means in every one of them? And you're going to say, in Psalm 17, verses 8 to 12, you're going to say the same thing. You're going to say it in Ezekiel. You're going to say it in other places. You have to be consistent. You can't just say, well, it meant one thing over here, and it meant something totally different somewhere else. Now, there are times, you got to know when you're able to do this. There are times where some things may not mean the exact same thing, even if it says the same word, right? I'll give an example. A ger. The Torah mentions many times this word ger. What does ger mean in general? It means a convert, usually. Usually means a convert. What else could a ger mean? A ger tosha, a non-Jew who lives amongst the Jewish people, right? And there are obligations to Jewish people to sustain them. They have to, keep the no-hide laws, can't do idolatry, etc. So now, someone will ask if it does not say ger toshav, literally a stranger of the land, right? If it just, if it doesn't say toshav, but it just says ger, what does it mean? What's the answer? Well, what's the rabbinical answer? Depends. Depends on what it is. Could be talking 100% about a convert. But if it's talking 100% about a convert, isn't a convert a full-fledged Jew? So why would the Torah use the word convert instead of saying a Jew? Right? So that's the whole question. There's the whole question. In the book of Exodus chapter 20, when it talks about the laws of Shabbos, and it says, when you make Kiddush, you're going to say, this one should rest and the animal should rest. And at the end, it says by a convert, right? And the convert also has to keep Shabbos. Well, why do you tell me that? You don't need to tell me that. Must be, why does it tell me that? If a convert's a Jew, then you shouldn't tell me that. If God's already talking to Jewish people, you don't need to tell me that, right? So it's discussion. It's a whole discussion. Who it's talking about. Is it really talking about a convert? And if it is, why? Or is it talking about a ger toshav? Then people say, it's talking about a non-Jew. See, a non-Jew can keep Shabbos, right? So the whole discussion. There's a whole discussion there, right? But the point is, I have to look and see what it says, right? Let's say better. I have to see what the context is. If I don't, if I close my eyes and I can just say, okay, it means this, it means this, it means this, right? You're not going to be right, all the time. You got to see in the context. Sometimes it's going to mean a convert. True. Many times in the Torah it says you can't oppress a convert. It's not talking about a ger toshav. I mean, you can't oppress non-Jews either, right? Most times it's talking about a convert. There are times maybe it's not talking about a convert. Okay, how do I know? Context, right? I used to hate that answer. When I was it's first learning how to learn. There are different terms, the Talmud uses. So you ask the question, well, how do I know it means this? It doesn't mean necessarily, it doesn't mean this, it means this or that. How do I know? What was the answer? Context. You got to see. But if you've learned enough, you see this term coming over and over and over again. So it'll be like second nature. You won't even have to think. You won't have to think after a while. Why? Because you know what the context is. But if you're going to cherry pick, you're going to say, no, this is the context. But you're way out in the bleachers. You're way out in left field. That's bringing Webster's like 25th definition, of what it means, whereas no context at all. None. It's not talking about the Messiah. Yeah, you're right. It's talking about suffering. Right. It's talking about fear. Right. And all that. What does that have to do with the Messiah? It's not a messianic chapter. There are messianic chapters. Okay. So fine. Bring it somewhere else. But to say no, that's talking about the suffering. And this is where it comes in. Right. Okay. Right. They want to show that it's all about his suffering. It's all about his crucifixion. Right. But again, that's coming totally out of left field. When you're coming out of left field, I would love for people at least to admit it. But here, here they're going to give Webster's, 250 a definite. No, it's a scribal error. It's a scribal error. So I would tell you, very good. You can tell me it's a scribal error. Find all the places where it says this and tell me it's a scribal error. Tell me across the board. Say, no, it's only in this place. Very good. Right? Then you get another explanation. Right? What are their other explanations? Right? Which is going to look at this, you're going to look at the Greek translation. Greek translation problematic because the rabbis didn't translate it. They didn't translate the prophets. They didn't translate the writings. They only translated the Torah. So that's going to be a problem. But again, like anything else, I have to see what it says. I have to see what, I have to see what the context is. You could cherry pick, okay, but just admit, I would be much happier. I think many people would be much happier saying, no, that's what it means. But tell me what the context is. Jeremiah chapter 30 is a good example. It's a very good example. It talks about the new covenant, right? But if you look at the beginning of the chapter, what's he screaming about? Well, the whole book of Jeremiah, he's screaming at the Jewish people to repent. And he wants them to repent. So there he's talking about reconnecting to the Old Testament, quote unquote, to the old covenant. Good question why he calls it a new covenant. Good question. But if you can't go against what Moshe Rabbeinu says, you can't add or subtract to the Torah. Where do you see over here? He's making a new covenant. You can't go against Moses. That's a new religion, right? You can't contradict him. You can't add or subtract. So if you can't add or subtract, how can it be going on something new? That means you're rejecting the old. But what is the context? That's the point. What's the context? So Jeremiah is screaming about going back to Torah mitzvahs, right? And keeping what our forefathers kept. What does that sound like? The old, quote unquote, old covenant. And he wants you to go back to that old covenant. Why is he called the new covenant? Right? Good question. Why is it called the new covenant? So we're going to answer very simple. Because he wants you to reconnect, to take it on again. Doesn't mean it's new. It's the same covenant. Doesn't change. Right? But there's inherent logic. So they're going to say, see, it says new covenant. So you must not be chosen. We have a whole agenda. Very good. You have a whole agenda. What's the problem? And again, they're going to have their own answers why we're not chosen anymore, this and that. But they believe Moses is true. Moses is a prophet. So what do you do when Moses said you can't add or subtract? Can't make something? No, he fulfilled it. He did all these things, blah, blah, blah. Very good. That's going to be their answer. But you can't change what it says. You can't change the text. You can't say, well, something's new. I'm going to in with the new, out with the old. Right? You can't do that. Right? And as we're going to see, there are other inconsistencies, also. But again, you have to see what the context is. Some of them are, whatever, we're not going to get there now. Right? I guess we'll stop with this. But the idea is that there are other things that, yeah, you look at context. Other things are blatant. They're absolutely blatant. How many people came down to Egypt? Right? According to the Christians, they 75. Torah says 70. Prophets don't make mistakes. God doesn't make mistakes. Right? There are plenty that are blatant. That we're going to see. Right? But that was at least That was at least two, right? At least about the Satan, right? And this whole mistranslation of Psalms chapter 22 verse 16. So I guess we'll make a part 3. I guess we'll have a part 3 next week. I guess we'll see unless something else, some other hot topic comes up. But other contradictions and just blatant misquotes. Yeah, we just did a couple today. So I guess that'll be a wrap. And I guess we'll have to see what see what's going to be next week.
Okay, I'll give you one thing to comment on if you don't mind.
Okay.
Only because I was trying to type it out as you were finishing up here. There is a young man named Justin watching. I say young because the image is hard to tell the thumbnail. He looks like he might be 18, 19, 20, whatever.
Okay.
So he tends to think that Isaiah 53 is talking about Jesus, when Isaiah 53 and Zephaniah 3:13 really they clearly show us talking about the remnant of Israel. But he's he's new to the channel. He's youngish also, so we're not going to get rude or anything like that. Not that you would. I'm just saying in general, be kind to him and everything. And then we will address this question that he has if you've got time. So Justin H., if you're listening right now, I'll give you a second. Justin H., pay attention to these next few minutes because you're understanding, since you're new to the channel, I've got over 1,500 videos, and probably over 50 of the videos talk about the questions you're bringing up, and they're clearly answered. But right now, just because it feels the right thing to do, I'll answer you as well as Richard Epler, who is also a new viewer out here. So if you guys would pay attention for a few minutes, Rabbi is going to tell you why Isaiah 53 can't be talking about Jesus, and I'll probably add a few final thoughts to it as well. But also, I do have specific videos on Isaiah 53 on my channel to tell you more details about who it really is talking about and proof that it can't be talking about Jesus. So, Rabbi, go ahead.
So why did you do that?
Do that instead? Yeah, I guess
just have them look at that. I mean,
yeah,
you got a whole thing on it.
That's a good point. Well, so Isaiah 53:9. I'll just say this then. Isaiah 53:9. The first and second parts. First of all, it says that that he made his grave with the wicked, and in his death was with the righteous. And that's what the actual Isaiah 53:9 says. But everybody knows that just the opposite happened to Jesus. Jesus was not buried in the wicked grounds. He was buried in a rich man's tomb, and he didn't die among the righteous. His death was among the wicked. And so there's no way, just by that verse alone, there's no way Isaiah 53 could be talking about Jesus. And if you still think that that's crazy, there's more grammar issues there where it doesn't say his death. It's actually in his deaths, plural. So cross-referencing that with Zephaniah 3:13, you will find out that they're word for word the same thing, the same language. And Zephaniah specifically says it's talking about the remnant of Israel. And so all the other claims that I've been watching through here, I tried to respond to a few, but you can really find those just by searching TaNaCh Talk channel and then your topic, and you can find any answer you want. So, but we welcome you here. We welcome your comments.
There's another, there is something also, it's also referring, if you look at those chapters, it's also referring to the, non-Jewish nations that have been tormented, inflicting pain and suffering on the Jewish people, right? So, God has saved us, absolutely, miraculous, and all that. But, but again, it's totally, totally taken out of context as you mentioned. Not only that, but there is a concept that we have to take responsibility for ourselves. We don't, you don't have someone coming, suffering, and that takes everything away, right? There are a lot of issues.
Sure.
Definitely a lot of issues with him.
One thing you'll find too, guys, between Justin and was it Jason? Who was the other guy? Richard. Justin and Richard. Most of the viewers here, I say most of them, are people who were in the Christian church for many years. Preachers, ex-preachers, went to seminary school, who all found this stuff out by studying the Hebrew. I myself was an ex-preacher as well. I know Hebrew. I'm not fluent with it, but I'm proficient enough to be able to read it biblically and understand what it's saying. And so this is not just a Jewish website, Jewish vlog, if you will, trashing Christianity. most of the people who are watching here in chat, in the subscribe, 15,000 subscribers we're coming up on, most of them are all ex-Christians, and they're finding out the same truth as well. And we're not talking about kids that are, 10-year-olds who don't want to go to church on Sunday. We're talking about people who are like natural-born scholars who went to school as preaching for, 20, 30 years, and they're finding this stuff out too. So just to let you know, this isn't a playground for sure. This is a really serious place. So we do welcome you here to the show, and I'd like for you guys to come back and comment, and just be sure to follow the
even
chat
though
rules.
I'm the less serious one on any of these shows.
Yeah, you think?
So you get what you don't pay for coming to this. You come at your own risk.
There you go. Well, Rabbi, thank you for your time, and all you people out there. I really appreciate y'all watching and commenting and keeping track of everything. I really appreciate that very much. And so you all have a wonderful, wonderful afternoon, and we'll see you again soon. Take care, everybody. Peace.
Shalom, my dear friends. Hope this message finds you well. If you like the way this channel is going, and the channel has been a blessing to you, please consider supporting the channel by going to the website, TaNachTalk.com, TaNachTalk.com. Thank you once again for your time and for supporting TaNaCh Talk. Shalom.